The storm rolled in faster than Eleanor expected. By the time she and Talon reached the narrow cleft carved into the canyon wall, the first drops of rain were already pattering on the stones. Lightning flickered far across the plains, illuminating the rugged silhouettes of cliffs that surrounded them. Inside the shelter, the air was cool and dry, the walls smoothed by centuries of wind. It wasn't large, but it felt safer than any room she had slept in for years. Talon laid several branches near the entrance, arranging them into a small fire that would not give off enough smoke to draw attention. Sparks leapt, catching slowly, and warm light spread across the stone. Eleanor sank down near the wall, hugging her arms around herself. Now that she was no longer walking, her aches came roaring back her ribs, her shoulder, the bruises along her jawline. Talon noticed. "He did this," he said, his voice low but certain. Eleanor flinched. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters," he insisted quietly. She stared at the fire instead of him. The flames danced in soft, twisting patterns, comforting yet hypnotic. She felt the weight of Talon's gaze on her, not demanding, not invasive, but steady, as if he were waiting for her to meet him halfway. After a long silence, she exhaled shakily. "My husband, Cole, he wasn't always like this. When we first married, he was stern, but not cruel. I thought he only needed time. I thought his anger came from grief, from losing his father the way he did. Everyone in town said the Comanches killed him." Talon's jaw tightened. "That is the story they tell." "It's what Cole always said," she murmured. "He said your people shot his father while he slept. He said your tribe attacked without reason, without mercy." Her fingers twisted into her skirt. "He said he hates every Comanche because he can't hate the one who took his father anymore. The man's dead, too." Talon sat still, watching her speak as if weighing each word. When Eleanor finally looked at him, his expression was unreadable. "What truly happened?" she whispered. He drew in a slow breath, the firelight reflecting in his deep-set eyes. "Your husband's father was not an innocent man. He led raids on Comanche hunting grounds, took horses, cut down our warriors who stood in his way. He believed the land belonged to him because he could put a fence around it." Eleanor's breath caught. "Cole said his father only defended himself." Talon shook his head. "His father brought the fight to us. My uncle died because of him." A flicker of grief passed through his eyes, old grief, worn but still present. "When our warriors went to confront him, he refused to leave our land. He drew his gun first. He shot one of ours. They fought back." Talon's voice remained calm, but the truth in it was unshakable. He was not murdered in his sleep. He died with a weapon in his hand. The fire crackled softly between them. Eleanor felt the truth settle into her chest like a stone. For years she had endured Cole's fury, believing it to be the grief of a man wronged. But if that grief was built on lies or half-truths twisted into hatred, then everything she had endured had been for nothing. Her suffering had been part of a story she never chose to be in. Talon continued, "Your husband uses hate to make himself powerful. A man who truly grieves does not raise his hand against the innocent." Her eyes stung. She blinked hard. If Cole lied about the past, what else did he lie about? Talon offered no answer, only silence, heavy and knowing. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples. The realization felt like the ground shifting beneath her. "I kept thinking if I could be better, quieter, more patient, maybe he'd stop. Maybe he would see I wasn't the enemy." "You were never his enemy," Talon said. "But he made you his captive." The word hit her like a physical blow. Captive. She had never dared say it aloud, never dared frame her life in such stark terms. But Talon's voice carried no judgment, only truth spoken with the weight of one who understood captivity in many forms. Eleanor's voice trembled as she asked, "Is that what you think I am now? A captive of yours?" His eyes flashed with something intense offense, but not anger. "No, you are free. You walk with me because you choose to. At dawn you can leave. I will not stop you." A sudden wave of emotion washed over her: relief, gratitude, confusion. "And if I go back?" she whispered. Talon's expression softened, though shadows lingered in his gaze. "Then you will face him again. And he will be the same man." Rain drummed against the canyon outside, each drop echoing the turmoil inside her chest. For the first time, Eleanor let herself truly imagine a life beyond her husband's reach, a life shaped not by fear, but by choice. By the fire's glow, she lifted her eyes to Talon, seeing him not as an enemy, not as a legend whispered in fear, but as the only person who had ever told her the truth, and that truth was the beginning of a shift she could no longer ignore. The storm outside battered the canyon with a rhythm that mirrored Eleanor's racing heart. Rain lashed against the stone walls, but inside the narrow shelter, the fire Talon had built flickered softly, casting shadows that danced across the rugged surfaces. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself again, partly for warmth, partly for courage, and felt the weight of everything she had fled pressing against her chest. She had expected fear, danger, and perhaps even death, but not this quiet, unsettling safety. Talon moved with deliberate calm as he stoked the fire, his presence filling the shelter in a way that made her aware of how small and fragile she felt. Yet there was a strength about him that demanded attention. He didn't need to speak to command the space. Every movement was a statement of control and certainty. Eleanor had never met a man who could occupy a room like that without arrogance or cruelty. It was disarming, even terrifying in its own way. "You should eat," he said finally, gesturing to a small bundle of dried meat and berries he had gathered earlier. "You need strength." She shook her head. I cannot," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her stomach was tight with nerves, and she couldn't stop thinking about the life she had left behind, or the one she might find here in this unexpected refuge. "I am not hungry." Talon sat near her, close enough that the warmth from his body brushed against hers without touching. He tore a piece of meat with practiced hands, eyes still scanning the shadows outside. "Hunger is not always for food," he said softly. "Sometimes it is for life itself." His gaze flicked to her face, steady and unreadable, and Eleanor shivered. Though she could not tell if it was from the cold or from the intensity of being seen so openly, she swallowed hard. "I do not know what I am supposed to do," she admitted. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I cannot go back to him. I cannot pretend that everything is fine, and yet I do not belong here either." Talon said nothing immediately. He leaned back against the stone wall, the firelight glinting in his eyes, and for a long moment Eleanor felt exposed beneath his gaze. It was not judgmental, but it was honest, as if he were peeling back the layers of her soul and finding truth in the shadows. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. She had never been so scrutinized without fear or anger attached. Finally, he spoke. "You are here. You are alive. That is what matters tonight. Tomorrow can wait." Eleanor looked at him, startled by the simplicity of his words. Nothing in her life had ever waited. Everything had always been urgent, frightening, driven by her husband's tempers or the town's whispered expectations. Here, for the first time, someone told her to breathe, to exist without consequence. And the sensation was intoxicating. Hours passed. The fire cracked, sending small sparks into the air, and Eleanor felt herself growing calmer, though the tension in her body did not fully fade. At some point, her gaze drifted to Talon, studying him in a way she hadn't dared before. His hair, dark and braided, framed a face hardened by years of hardship but softened by moments like this. small flashes of humanity that contradicted the fearsome reputation of his people. She had been taught to hate him, yet here he was, offering nothing but protection and patience. A sudden crack of lightning illuminated the shelter. The shadows played across Talon's face, making his features sharper, more defined. Eleanor's breath caught. Something shifted in the air between them, a fragile, tense current she could not name. Her pulse raced, not from fear, but from awareness, from recognition that her body and mind were responding to his presence in ways she had never allowed herself to consider. I don't want to go back, she admitted, her voice barely audible over the storm. Not to him? Not to the life I had. Talon turned his gaze fully toward her, dark eyes locking with hers. Then you will not, he said simply, a promise, not a question. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are yours to choose. The words wrapped around her like warmth. Eleanor felt something she had buried long ago, desire, longing, the ember of a life she had denied herself. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, a shiver that was both frightening and electrifying. She had never been touched with such gentleness, such consideration by any man. And she realized with a jolt that she did not fear him. She feared the unknown consequences of this feeling, yet part of her yearned to explore it. Talon, sensing the shift, remained still but closer now, his presence a constant gravity. Eleanor's heartbeat thundered. She was trembling, but not from cold. The firelight reflected in her wide eyes as she met his gaze, and in that silent, tense moment, everything changed. The storm outside could rage as it would. Inside the shelter, two worlds collided, two enum. The night Eleanor fled her husband's ranch was a night she would remember for the rest of her life. The moon hung low, swollen and pale, casting a thin silver sheen over the wide Texas plains. The air was sharp with the scent of dust and ironweed, and the wind carried only the faintest whisper of the world behind her. She did not dare look back. Every heartbeat felt like a drum echoing in her ribs, pushing her forward, urging her to run faster before he discovered she was gone. She had no plan, no supplies, and no destination except away. Away from the man whose rage shaped every hour of her life. Away from the house where every creaking floorboard made her tense, knowing it might be followed by his boots approaching. Away from the bruises that still throbbed along her ribs from his last outburst. She had waited hours for him to fall into his drunken sleep before slipping barefoot into the night. She only knew she needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with his anger, but the plains were not kind to those who wandered them alone in the dark. She had walked farther than she realized, and exhaustion crept into her limbs. Her feet stung with every step. Her breath came in torn, shaky gasps. Still, she forced herself onward until the land around her began to change. The grass grew shorter and the ground sloped downward, opening into a scrub-filled canyon she did not recognize. She paused at its edge, trembling, unsure if she was walking into danger. But danger was behind her too, and it had her husband's name. A faint sound broke the stillness. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal moving through brush. It was deliberate, soft, controlled, unmistakably human. Her heart spasmed in her chest. Before she could turn, a shadow separated itself from the dark rock formations behind her. A tall figure stepped into the moonlight, his stance steady and unhurried, the kind of calm that spoke of absolute confidence. He wore soft leather and beads, his long braids tied back, his face marked with paint that glimmered faintly in the pale light. She recognized him instantly by the way he carried himself. Comanche, her husband's most hated enemy. Fear scattered through her body like sparks. She stepped back, but the heel of her foot met empty air at the canyon's edge. She froze, arms slightly lifted, breath trapped in her lungs as if she were the hunted creature she felt like. The warrior stopped a few paces away. raising one hand in a gesture that was neither threat nor surrender, simply a boundary. His eyes, dark and steady, swept over her, taking in her torn dress, her swollen cheek, her trembling form. The moonlight revealed an expression she could not name. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't triumph. It was closer to curiosity, deep, silent curiosity. She forced air into her lungs. I'm not a threat, she managed, the words faint and cracked. I'm just passing through. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something beyond her voice. Then, in English roughened by his own language, he answered, I know who you are. Her stomach dropped. If he knew, then he also knew whose wife she was, and what that meant. My husband, he'll come looking, she whispered, though she hated how small her voice sounded. He'll think you took me. A faint trace of something, maybe amusement, maybe pity, touched the warrior's eyes. I did not take you, he said simply. You came running. Heat bloomed across her face, not from shame but from the truth she had spent years pretending didn't exist. She was running, and she had no idea what she was running toward. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The plains sighed around them. Clouds drifted across the moon. Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze not as a threat, but as something unsettlingly gentle. Something she had never felt from any man, let alone one her husband called an enemy. Finally, he stepped aside and pointed toward the canyon floor where a narrow trail wound downward. There is water, he said. You need it. She hesitated. Trusting him could end her life, but refusing might end it too. And so, trembling but determined, Eleanor followed the Comanche warrior into the canyon, unaware that this moment, this forbidden encounter under the moonlit sky, would become the first step toward a bond neither of them was meant to form, and a choice that would alter both of their worlds forever. The trail into the canyon was narrow, carved by years of rainwater and wild animals. Jagged stones jutted from the walls, and the air grew cooler the farther Eleanor followed the Comanche warrior down. Each step felt like a leap of faith. She kept a few paces behind him, her breath unsteady, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities, none of them certain, all of them frightening. Yet the man in front of her walked with a quiet certainty that made it impossible for her to turn back. It wasn't dominance or arrogance. It was purpose, carved into every step he took, as if he knew the land the way he knew his own heartbeat. Unlike her husband, who moved through the world with a clenched fist, this warrior moved as though the earth accepted him without question. The canyon widened near the bottom, and a faint, silvery thread of water glimmered ahead. It trickled from a spring nestled between smooth stones, catching the moonlight like glass. Eleanor's throat tightened at the sight, the dryness in her mouth making her aware of how desperate she had become. He gestured toward the spring. Drink. The single word held no command, no sharpness. It was an offering. She knelt slowly, letting the cool water wash over her hands before cupping them to her lips. The first swallow sent a tremor through her body, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something besides fear. While she drank, the warrior remained a short distance away, watching the canyon mouth with a cautious stillness. He wasn't guarding her. He was guarding for her. That realization unsettled her more than anything else. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand. You haven't asked why I'm out here, she said softly. I do not need to ask, he replied without looking at her. I saw the bruises. Heat stung the back of her eyes. She had spent years hiding those bruises beneath dresses, behind excuses, behind silence. Her husband had always insisted no one would believe her anyway, that people respected him too much to take her side. Maybe he had been right. No one in town ever looked too closely, but this stranger had noticed within moments. She drew her knees to her chest, hugging them lightly. "My husband will blame you," she whispered. "He'll say you kidnapped me." His jaw tightened briefly, a flicker of tension passing through his expression. "Your husband blames my people for many things," he said. "Most of them lies he tells himself to feel like a man." Eleanor stared at him. No one had ever spoken about her husband so openly, so unafraid. It felt like stepping into a world with different rules where truth wasn't something to fear. "My name is Talon," he added after a moment. "Talon," she murmured, testing the name on her tongue. "I'm Eleanor." He nodded, as though he had already suspected her name but waited for her to offer it. The gesture, so simple, so respectful, brought a sting of emotion to her chest. A rustling sound echoed somewhere up the canyon, and she stiffened. Talon reacted instantly, his body turning with fluid ease, his hand resting on the hilt of the long blade at his side. Eleanor's breath caught, expecting danger, but a moment later a fox darted across the stones and vanished between shadows. Talon relaxed slightly, but the brief flash of protectiveness stayed with her. "You should rest," he said. "You have walked far." "I don't know where I'm supposed to go," she admitted. "If I return, I don't know what he will do. But staying here," her voice faltered. "I don't want to cause trouble between your people and mine." Talon's gaze lowered to her trembling hands. "You think you are trouble?" he asked quietly. "You are a woman running from a man who broke his vows. That is not trouble. That is survival." No one had ever framed it that way. She felt the words settle over her like a blanket warm, steadying, frighteningly kind. She swallowed. "Will you hurt me?" she asked before she could stop herself. Talon's expression did not change, but something deep in his eyes sparked a mixture of surprise and anger, not at her, but at the world that had made her ask such a question. "No," he said simply. "I have no reason to hurt you." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. Talon glanced at the sky. "A storm is coming. We cannot stay in the open." Her pulse quickened. "Where will we go?" "There is a shelter cut into the cliff," he said. "We will stay until the storm passes. I will keep watch. No harm will come to you tonight. No harm." A promise she had never been offered by the man who vowed to protect her Dot as she followed Talon toward the darkened shelter. Eleanor realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't walking in fear, she was walking toward safety, toward someone who saw her, not someone who chose mercy where others chose violence, and that mercy was the beginning of a bond neither of them could yet name. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving a silver mist clinging to the canyon walls and a damp chill that made Eleanor pull her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Talon had kept watch through the night, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the early morning light as he stood near the canyon entrance. Eleanor had watched him too, unable to tear her gaze away, feeling a strange mix of fear, fascination, and longing. There was a quiet power about him, a kind of calm that made her aware of her own vulnerability and, strangely, her desire. She had spent the hours in restless thought, replaying the events that had brought her here, questioning every decision she had ever made, every moment she had suffered under her husband's hand. And with each thought, she realized something terrifying and undeniable. She didn't want to return to the life she had known. She didn't want to go back to Cole, to the bruises, to the fear that had filled every corner of her existence. Her eyes met Talon's as he approached, and something unspoken passed between them. His dark gaze was steady, measured, unreadable. Yet there was a subtle warmth in the depths of his eyes that drew her in, leaving her breathless. She felt herself trembling, though not from cold. Her body and mind were aligned in a sudden, intense awareness. He was the opposite of everything she had endured. Every instinct in her screamed to turn away, but every fiber of her being longed to move closer. She forced herself to speak, her voice barely a whisper. I cannot go back to him." Talon's expression did not change, though his eyes flickered with a hint of understanding, perhaps surprise. "Then you won't," he said simply. "You have a choice." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. A choice. For the first time in years, she could shape her life, and it terrified her. She had always been bound by fear, by expectation, by a man who claimed ownership of her body and spirit. And now here, in the shadowed canyon, she faced freedom that felt as alien as it was exhilarating. Eleanor's hands clenched the fabric of her skirt. Her pulse raced as she stepped closer, uncertain if she was stepping toward danger or liberation or perhaps both. Her voice trembled as she spoke the words she had not allowed herself to imagine until now. I do not want to be anyone else's, not his. Not anyone's but mine, please. Make me yours." The words hung in the morning air, fragile, raw, and impossible. Talon froze for the briefest moment, a flicker of shock passing across his features. Then he looked away, as if he needed to steady himself against the force of what she had just confessed. Eleanor's heart pounded violently. She had risked everything in that single sentence, exposing herself completely to a man who, until yesterday, had been her enemy by reputation. Talon's hands flexed at his sides. He did not move closer immediately, as though he were weighing the gravity of her request, the dangers it might bring. His voice, when it came, was low, deliberate, and layered with a complexity that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "I cannot promise the world, nor the safety you had known before. But I can promise you this: I will not take what you do not freely give. You will choose this, or it will end." Her breath caught. She had never been treated as anything but an object, a possession, a source of blame and violence. And now, the man she had been taught to fear was telling her that her choice mattered, that her desire mattered. Eleanor's trembling fingers brushed against a nearby rock for grounding. "I choose you," she whispered. "I want to be with you. I want everything you are willing to give me." The moment stretched between them, suspended in fragile tension. Talon's eyes softened imperceptibly, though the storm of emotions behind them remained controlled. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped closer, the air between them charged with an electricity neither of them could deny. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic, a force that made Eleanor aware of every nerve, every heartbeat, every pulse in her body. "You understand the consequences," he murmured, his gaze locking with hers. "Once this path begins, there is no turning back. You will not return to him, not safely. You will leave behind everything you have known." Eleanor nodded, swallowing the fear that still lingered in her chest. "I understand. And I am ready." The acknowledgement passed like fire between them, consuming the old boundaries, burning away fear, leaving only the raw truth of desire and choice. For the first time in her life, Eleanor was not a captive. She was a woman declaring her freedom, her longing, her claim to her own life. And Talon, the Comanche warrior who had been her enemy by the world's measure, was the man who would witness, honor, and share it with her Dot as the sun climbed higher, spilling light into the canyon and glinting off the wet stones. Eleanor felt the impossible reality settling in. She had chosen the man she was once forbidden to trust, and in doing so, she had begun a journey from fear to passion, from survival to love, and from captivity to freedom. And in that fragile, electric morning, she understood that life would never be the same again. The morning mist still clung to the canyon walls as Eleanor followed Talon deeper into the sheltered paths of the Comanche lands. Each step was heavy with a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. She was leaving behind everything familiar: the house, the town, even the man she had once married, not with fear but with a strange, liberating clarity. For the first time in her life, her choices were truly her own. And the weight of that freedom pressed against her chest like both a blessing and a challenge. Talon walked ahead. Silent but present, the rhythm of his steps steady and unyielding. He did not rush her, nor did he look back often, but Eleanor could feel the unspoken trust in his presence. He was not leading her as one might lead a captive. He was walking beside her as an equal, a protector, and someone who understood the fragile power of choice. That awareness sent shivers through her, a thrill mingled with something deeper. More intimate as the canyon opened to a hidden valley. Eleanor caught glimpses of the Comanche village nestled among the trees and hills. Smoke rose gently from several dwellings, curling into the sky like ribbons of welcome. For a moment, she hesitated. The world she had known ended here, and a new one waited for her on the other side of the valley. Talon paused, turning his gaze toward her. "This is your choice," he said softly. "You can walk away now, return to your husband, to the life you claimed was yours. Or you can continue and embrace what is offered here." Eleanor's heart raced. There was fear in that choice, danger, uncertainty, judgment, but it was overshadowed by something she had long forgotten: desire. She wanted this life, this man, and the possibility of a bond built not on ownership or fear, but on freedom and trust. Her voice trembled, but it carried the conviction of her soul. "I choose to stay," she said. "With you." Talon studied her face, the storm of emotion mirrored in her wide, determined eyes. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing the tension of a long-held restraint, then stepped closer. "Then understand," he said, his voice low and firm, "this is not a surrender to passion. It is a vow. You will not be taken by force. You will be here because you have chosen it." Eleanor's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her dress, her pulse hammering in her ears. "I understand," she whispered. "I am ready to live for the first time in my life. Not for him, not for anyone, but for myself." A faint smile curved Talon's lips, a rare softness that made Eleanor's chest ache. He extended a hand toward her, steady and unwavering, the promise of safety and shared strength radiating from his gesture. She took it without hesitation, feeling a current of connection pass between them, a silent acknowledgement that this moment, and the choice she had made, would bind their lives together in ways neither could yet predict. For the first time, Eleanor felt what it meant to be seen as more than property or possession. She was recognized as a woman capable of desire, capable of choice, capable of love on her own terms. And Talon, the man whose people had once been her enemy, stood as the witness and guardian of that truth. They walked together into the valley, the sounds of life surrounding them, children laughing, the low hum of conversations, the rhythmic clatter of daily chores. Eleanor realized that she was not intruding on this world. She was entering it by her own will, as someone who had been given agency over her own life. Every step reinforced the reality she had longed for, the reality that she could belong somewhere, and to someone who respected her heart and body. Talon's presence beside her was steady, grounding, yet electric with unspoken possibility. She had never imagined that her desire could be recognized, nurtured, or even welcomed by a man who was not her captor. And yet, here he was not demanding, not forcing, not controlling, but giving her the rarest gift, choice as the sun climbed higher. Spilling golden light across the valley, Eleanor felt the boundaries of her old life crumble. Her husband's shadow no longer loomed over her. Her fear, though still faintly lingering, was replaced by a growing confidence, a sense of belonging, and an anticipation of the passion and connection she had been denied for so long. And in that moment, she knew with unwavering certainty that she had chosen correctly. This path, this man, this life, whatever it held, was hers to claim. And for the first time, Eleanor felt whole, powerful, and entirely free. Eleanor had barely settled into the quiet rhythm of the valley when the first signs of danger appeared. Her husband, Cole, had realized she was missing, and he did not wait for patience or reason. He and several of his men were following, tracking her through the rough terrain, fueled by rage, pride, and the humiliation of a wife who had dared to defy him. Eleanor sensed it before Talon did a faint disturbance in the wind. The echo of voices carried from a distance, the sharp tension that prickled the back of her neck. Talon had noticed it too. He stood at the edge of the valley, scanning the horizon with the precision of a hunter. His body tensed as the sounds grew clearer, the low, angry shouts of men and the unmistakable rhythm of boots on rough ground. He did not speak immediately, only drew Eleanor slightly closer, his hand brushing hers in a subtle signal that they must prepare. "They're coming," he said finally, his voice low, calm, but carrying a weight of warning. "Your husband has not taken this lightly." Eleanor's heart sank, yet a strange steadiness filled her. She was no longer the frightened, submissive wife who had fled in silence. She had made a choice, and that choice carried with it a defiance she could no longer deny. "I will not go back," she said firmly. "Not for him, not for anyone. He cannot take me from here." Talon's eyes softened briefly, but only briefly, as he nodded. "Then you will stand with me. Do you understand?" She did. The first of Cole's men appeared over the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Behind them, Cole himself rode forward, fury etched in every line of his face. He was a man driven by wounded pride and decades of violent belief that he owned not only the land, but the people under his roof, most painfully, his wife. "You insolent woman," Cole shouted as he drew closer. "Get back to me this instant." Eleanor did not flinch. She stepped forward, chest high, the morning light catching the resolve in her eyes. "No," she said clearly, her voice ringing across the valley. "I belong to no one but myself. Not to you, not to anyone who claims ownership over me. I am done living in fear." Shock crossed Cole's face, but his rage flared faster than reason. He lashed out verbally, calling her names, blaming her for bringing shame, invoking fear and guilt the way he always had. Eleanor felt the old familiar panic stir for a fleeting moment, but Talon's hand on her back grounded her. She could feel his strength, his presence, and the unspoken promise that he would not let harm come to her. "You see," Talon said, stepping forward with deliberate calm, "she speaks the truth. You have no claim over her. She is free to choose, and she has chosen life, dignity, and peace." Cole's laugh was bitter, trembling with fury. "Peace? Life? She is mine by law and by vow. You—" He stopped abruptly as Talon moved with swift precision, positioning himself between Eleanor and the men advancing behind Cole. Talon did not draw his weapon, yet his stance alone radiated control, danger, and inevitability. "Step back," Talon said, voice quiet but absolute. "She will not return with you. You will leave, or you will be met with force. This is your only warning." Eleanor felt a surge of empowerment she had never known. She had endured threats, bruises, and years of intimidation, but this moment was different. She was no longer silent, no longer invisible. She had chosen her own path, and now she could claim her own voice. The confrontation escalated for only moments longer. Cole's men, sensing the absolute confidence in Talon and the resolve in Eleanor, faltered. Their leader's fury could not compel their obedience, against a woman who had defied him and a warrior who would not yield. One by one, they retreated, grumbling, dragging their shame and disbelief behind them. Cole, seeing his plans unravel, glared at Eleanor one last time. His face was red with anger, his pride shattered, and yet even he could not force compliance. With a final, furious glare, he mounted his horse and turned away. defeated by truth, by courage, and by the impossibility of controlling a heart that had already chosen. Eleanor exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body like water released from a dam. Talon's hand stayed near hers, a silent reassurance. The threat had passed, but the resonance of victory lingered. She had not only escaped her husband's tyranny, but had faced it openly and claimed her freedom. She turned to Talon, seeing in him the man who had protected her, guided her, and witnessed her transformation. The canyon, the valley, and the quiet hum of life around them seemed to swell with possibility. Eleanor realized that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer a victim, no longer a captive, no longer defined by fear. She was hers, wholly and unapologetically, and she had Talon by her side to affirm it. For the first time in her life, Eleanor could breathe freely, knowing the man who had once been her enemy now stood with her as an ally, protector, and perhaps more than she had dared hope. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the valley in golden light, she understood the magnitude of the life she had chosen, a life that was finally, irrevocably, her own. The valley had returned to its quiet rhythm, the storm now a memory in the scent of wet earth and the soft rustling of trees. Eleanor stood at the edge of the small river that ran through the Comanche village, the water reflecting the golden morning sun like liquid fire. Her heart was still racing from the confrontation with Cole and his men, yet beneath the adrenaline was a profound sense of peace she had never known. She had chosen her life, claimed her freedom, and survived the wrath of the man who had tried to own her. Talon approached silently, his figure cutting a calm, solid line against the bright landscape. He did not speak immediately, only offered her his hand. Eleanor accepted it without hesitation, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. The connection between them, forged in fear, danger, and shared understanding, was undeniable. She had spent years yearning for protection, for someone to see her not as a possession but as a person, and she had found it in the most unexpected of places, with a man she had once been taught to fear. "You are certain?" Talon asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "This path, it is not without challenge. You leave one world behind for another. There is no return to the life you knew." Eleanor's gaze did not waver. She felt the weight of every choice she had made, every fear she had faced, every step that had brought her to this moment. "I am certain," she said firmly. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose freedom." The corners of Talon's lips lifted in the faintest expression of approval, a soft shadow of a smile that spoke of pride, relief, and something deeper he did not yet name. "Then it is done," he said. "You are no longer bound by fear, by ownership, or by the past. You belong to yourself, and I am here, beside you by choice." Eleanor exhaled, feeling a rush of emotion she could barely contain. Years of confinement, of whispered threats, of silent suffering, seemed to fall away with each breath. She could feel the sun on her skin, the cool water at her feet, the solidity of Talon beside her, and the truth settled into her bones. She was free. Truly free. They walked through the village together, side by side, Eleanor no longer shrinking from the curious eyes of the Comanche people. She realized she did not feel like an outsider, though she had arrived from another world. She was stepping into a life that demanded strength, courage, and the willingness to claim her place, and she was ready. Talon guided her gently, introducing her to members of his tribe with respect and care, never forcing. Always allowing her to choose how she would be seen. As they reached a quiet clearing, Talon turned to face her. His expression was steady, the weight of his gaze gentle, yet unwavering. "Your journey has been hard," he said, "and there will be challenges ahead. But know this, you are not alone. Whatever you choose, whatever life demands, I am here. Eleanor felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from fear, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of being seen, valued, and respected. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for letting me choose, for standing with me." Talon's hand brushed against hers, the gesture intimate but not hurried. "You did this for yourself," he reminded her softly. "I only walked beside you." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that had been absent from her life for far too long. For the first time, she felt whole, powerful, and unashamed of desire or longing. She was no longer the frightened, obedient wife of a cruel man. She was Eleanor, the woman who had chosen freedom, who had claimed life on her terms, and who had found love in a place she never expected. The day stretched before them, bright and limitless. Children laughed in the distance. Men and women went about their tasks with the quiet pride of shared purpose, and the valley seemed to hum with the promise of new beginnings. Eleanor felt the pulse of life, strong and persistent, and knew she had stepped fully into it. Talon took her hand, lifting it gently. "Shall we?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, squeezing his hand in return. Together, they walked forward into the life she had chosen. Side by side, a woman no longer bound by fear, a man no longer defined by old grudges, and two hearts claiming each other freely. And in that quiet valley, under the open sky, Eleanor understood that freedom was more than escape. It was the power to choose love, safety, and dignity. It was the courage to stand for oneself. And in Talon's unwavering presence, she found all of it and more. The promise of a life finally, irrevocably hers.